All right. What's going on, everybody? And welcome to a video where we talk about one of the more controversial topics in Starcraft 2. The Starcraft 2 economy is, by many people's accounts, completely broken. By others, it has some issues that could be improved upon. And I think I probably stand somewhere in between those two, where there are some clear issues, ones that I've deeply experimented on and explored over the last couple of years to try and figure out what's at the heart of these. Why does StarCraft 2 in 2026 and in Legacy in the Void in general feel so different to what it felt like in Wings of Liberty and Heart of the Swarm? Is it just there being more units? Is it the players being better? And how much of the economy changing in Legacy of the Void has changed different strategies and flows throughout the rest of the game? Before we start, let's talk about what changed in Legacy of the Void. So Legacy of the Void is where the biggest economic changes happen in StarCraft 2. And essentially one of the big things is they changed the starting worker count. So we can reorder this list here. They made it so there was 12 workers up from 6 workers. And one of the main things people complain about with that is that it limits early options. You can't 6 pool, 8 pool, 9 pool, 10 pool. It's 12 pools the earliest you can do it. And that is obviously nowhere near as committed as one of those earlier pools. You can't take your gases crazily fast and tech up. But also a CC first, right? A Nexus first, taking your hatchery first. Any of that sort of very economic opening is nowhere near as big of a commitment as it is when you start with 6 workers. When you do that with 6 workers, it slows down your first military building much more. It is more of a gamble, more of a coin flip. So basically there are less early gambles one can take. Some would say that's good. It makes the game more consistent, less cheesy. You can't just gamble to win. But this does also, it's a big part of where very favored players in pro matches are more dominant than ever before as well. So it has reduced the overall variance, which whilst it can feel good sometimes to not get cheesed as much, it's a plus and a minus subjectively depending on whether you rate, if you want every game to be the same, that's good because, well, there's less BS surprises that hit you. It's also a negative because there's less creative things you can do. There's less interesting choices for you to make as a player. So it's a double-edged sword. And that's something to really keep in mind with the 12 workers start. Now, not only that, but because they didn't want players to be supply blocked at the start of StarCraft 2 games, they actually changed the supply. So the Command Center used to give 11 supply in Heart of the Swarm, and 10 for the Nexus. They both give 15 supply now. So every time you expand with Command Center or Nexus, you get an extra 4 supply as a Terran player, compared to the Heart of the Swarm Wings of Liberty, or 5 supply as a Protoss. For a Zerg, it's gone up from 4 to 6 supply. You get an extra 2 supply per hatchery. So expanding essentially gives you a little bit more mineral value, a little bit of extra supply. It doesn't sound like a lot. Obviously, if you build a pylon or an overlord or a depot, that kicks in much faster. But it does add up a lot. The fact that you get 15 supply from a command center. When a Terran does a 3 command center opening, they don't need to go past 2 supply depots for a very long period. They're at 55 supply often when they start their 3rd supply depot. And this does basically reward fast expanding more. So a lot of people would say there is too much value from expanding. This is one of the key flaws. And there is limited choices in the early game, right? Limiting early options and too much value from expanding are 2 side effects of this 12 worker change. Not only that, but Blizzard also changed the mineral and gas. They made it so it went from 2,500 gas per geyser down to 2,250. Not really a big change, still lasts a very long time in Legacy of the Void, but not quite as long in terms of they didn't want players to just turtle. Big complaint in Heart of the Swarm was players turtled on 3 base for way too long, and even if you took 5 or 6 bases, you didn't get enough of an advantage over a 3 base player for it to feel very rewarding. So not only did they reduce the gas, they also, much more impactfully, and this is what we're going to focus on, changed the minerals. It used to be all 8 mineral patches in your main, and every other base would have 1,500 minerals. They lowered those to 900 only on 4 of the patches, whilst the other 4 patches got even more minerals at 1,800. So overall, it's not about the total minerals on the base, though yes, you can see that number did overall go down a little bit. What matters is you can only mine with 16 workers from a base, but after just 8.5 minutes in a normal game, half of your mineral patches in your main will disappear. These 4 mineral patches with 900 minerals. And you know what that means. I'll make this a bit bigger so it's easier for you guys to read, especially if you're watching on phones. Maybe that size is okay. That means that at 8.5 minutes, if you're only on 2 bases, you can only mine minerals with 16 on your expansion and 8 in your main. That's 24 workers rather than the normal 32. Likewise, your natural will usually run out of half of those mineral patches about 11.5 minutes. Whereas, to give you guys context, HOTS equals main base mines out, I think it's about 14 minutes 45, I want to say. Somewhere, you guys can fact check me on that, but it's basically the whole base would last a lot longer. So one of the big changes with that we'll talk about a bit later is kind of the double whammy. But let's just continue talking about the changes for now, rather than talking about the flow on effects of those. So the macro mechanics were also nerfed, guys. Mules went down from 270 minerals down to 225 per mule. Lava inject went from 4 per 3 for Zerg, which I think might be the biggest one of these nerfs. It's all of your lava comes from hatcheries and injects. And in pro play, I'd say about... before it would be basically 3 lava would produce off a hatchery every 33 seconds. Pros would inject near perfectly in the early game, which means they would get 4 lava every 29 seconds from an inject. So basically, you were losing 25% here of, I don't know, 55%, 60% of your lava supply. Break that down, it's about 15%. I think it's about overall a 15% nerf on your overall lava production. And that's not just, that's produced every unit for Zerg. So Zerg definitely got a big hit to their overall production. And I'm not 100% sure if that's commensurate with like the mule percentage decrease, because I think that was also about a 17% nerf. I think the idea was like everything was kind of nerfed roughly 17%. Now Chrono Boost is the hardest one to figure out because they did change the energy, I believe, from 25 to 50, and I think they lowered the speed boost. So the thing is, they changed it about 50 times after Legacy of Release as well as during the beta, and it's gone back and forth so many times that it's actually very hard to trace exactly what the chrono changes were. But essentially, they basically nerfed it a little bit, so it was just not quite as impactful. So they tried to kind of nerf all of them roughly in line, but there's been so many redesigns to Protoss over the years since then and throughout Legacy of the Void that it's kind of hard to trace the many changes of Chrono Boost. Lastly, they changed the 3 core basic early game techs of each race. Zergling Speed, Stimpack, and Warp Gate all upgrade about 20-30 seconds faster than they did in Heart of the Swarm and Wings of Liberty, so they wouldn't lag too far behind the increased speed of the early game. Otherwise, Stim might kick in and you've already got 45 Marines. You're waiting for Stim to kick in and you're like, okay, it's finally here, boys, let's go. Which makes sense. But what's weird about this change is like, they didn't change the Spire build time, the Factory build time, the Blue Flame upgrade time. So everything else is slowed down. And what this kind of did is it's like, well, your early game units beef up a bit quicker, which I guess is kind of good, but it also, you could say, slowed down every other piece of tech in the entire game at the same time. Some people have suggested a great way to counteract this would be to speed up like the Spire. And we did actually knock a few seconds off the Spire build time because it was at 71 seconds before the last patch. It's down to, I think, 66 now. And one of the crazy things is like, if you played Mutas and you went for it early, the 6-worker start without the economy just speeding up so quickly, it was the same Spire timing, but waiting 71 seconds for that Spire to kick in, or it was a different number back in the day because the seconds went by faster, right? But you would basically be waiting for that to kick in, and then it would kick in, and you'd both be at like kind of 2 base economy, and your mutas get in, and your opponent might not have even started their 3rd command center. Or if they have, it's okay because you're still slowing down their engineering base starting, and you're getting in and you're forcing missile turrets, and you're forcing a really big reaction. And one of the big changes we saw is with the 12-worker start, by the time you get a lair, which takes a minute, and then a Spire, a minute and 10 seconds, and then your mutas get out and fly across the map. Terran's got 3 command centers, 2 engineering bays, 5 barracks, and time to build missile turrets without really interrupting their build very much at all. So in general, and that's not just that, it's also if you choose to rush for an Oracle on one base, it hits like 15-20 seconds faster than if you go for an expansion and then go for an Oracle. Like it's the differentiation on these builds is not only minimized because of the 12-worker start, but you've also got that the tech themselves and the delay on how long it takes to build each tech unit, make each upgrade, make each structure is quite long compared to the pacing of where StarCraft 2 is at with these changes when you add them all together. Okay, so essentially, the main conclusions that I've come to after many experiments, and we'll fill you in more on what those experiments were in a bit, was that I'd like to see the worker count be reduced to 6 to 8 workers. And this is what some people have absolutely just been like, yes, do it. I hate that they ever changed the worker count. And many other people say, no, it would slow the game down. It's boring. It's pointless. Why would you do that? And it's subjective. This is a matter of taste. There is no completely right or wrong answer here. Let's start with that before I make my arguments. I don't think you can be 100% wrong if you simply prefer one or the other. Keep that in mind, and let me know your thoughts in the comments as we go through this. And please try to listen to as much of the video as possible before you comment, if you could. So basically, right, I also think not only should you go down to a 6 or 8 worker count, a bit lower, something on the lower end. If I've tried 9, 10, 11, and it feels like all you're doing is just changing the build order numbers from 12 workers, it doesn't feel different enough. But I think 8 workers feels really good. Like, it feels really nice. But also, I think the minerals should go back to Heart of the Swarm minerals in the main base, where it doesn't mine out as fast. And I think that's really good, because it's also possible to do this with all bases having more minerals. The problem of doing that is then you can turtle on 3 bases for very long. There's the Heart of the Swarm problem. It's not very fun in SC2. Whereas if you just make the main base have more minerals, it strikes a balance of allowing a little bit more turtle play, because that main doesn't mine out 8.5 minutes, but you still got the natural will mine out quicker, the third will half mine out quicker, so you still get rewarded for taking a fast 4th, a fast 5th, a fast 6th. A player who does choose to get out there and get map control gets rewarded. But on the other hand, with the main not mining out, it avoids a player who does a heavy tech aggro build on 1 to 2 bases running into the double whammy. Now, if you don't know what the double whammy is, the double whammy is something that I'm very passionate about, and it's really kicked into my brain in the last year or two as I've been thinking about this, about how problematic the double whammy is in Legacy of the Void. So the double whammy is, in current Legacy, when you do an aggro 1 or 2 base build, or you tech to mutas really fast in low economy, at 8.5 minutes, your opponent, assuming they've defended, gets a 3rd base up, gets a 3rd mineral line with their standard Legacy of the Void economy build. That's a nice advantage. Normally in RTS, that is the entire advantage. You do a 2 base aggression, your opponent takes a 3rd, they take some damage, but they survive. They have a 3rd base with 5 or 8 workers on. Let's say they have 8 workers on it. Let's say you're both you're on like 40 workers on 2 base, they're on 48 workers. They've got, okay, the 3rd base, they've got an 8 worker advantage. They've defended a nice economic advantage. They are ahead in the RTS. Like, this is classic RTS, is they made a base and then defended it. You know, White would say, first we make base, then we defense it, right? Like, yeah, that's what it's about. The double whammy here kicks in though, because guess what? At 8.5 minutes, we already mentioned, that is when your minerals mine out. Those 4 900 mineral patches in the main mine out, you lose the ability to mine with 8 of your workers. And that means you on 40 workers on 2 base can now only mine 1.5 mineral lines. Your opponent can mine 2.5 mineral lines. So you are a full base behind on minerals, because they can transfer 8 workers from their main to the 3rd. They are up an entire base on mining of you, despite only having an 8 worker advantage. Now, obviously, you could put guys on gas, you could take extra gases, you could do different things, but minerals is by far the most important resource in StarCraft 2. It is the linchpin that holds everything else together, and being behind like that is such a kicker. This forces players to constantly expand no matter what else is happening, or do critical damage to the opponent. An extended 1 to 2 base play with lots of tech, unit interactions, and tech swaps as a valid next step, rather than just being forced to expand behind everything like in current SC2, is a part of why the games are pushed in a certain linear direction. Now, there are still many ways you can play SC2. It's just that when it comes to the economic choices, one way is rewarded a little more than the others. The path of continually, quickly expanding and getting 4 bases up as quickly as possible is the dominant one because of that. Now, the way balance works in strategy games is there are small push and pull factors that nudge players in different directions and towards different paths, and even a small nudge in a certain direction can eventually lead to an incredibly dominant meta. In my opinion, you guys can argue with me on this, let me know. I'm super open to hearing lots of thoughts. This is all not an exact science by any means, so keep that in mind. But the meta for many years, since about 2018, once people really figured out Legacy of the Void, it's involved very fast, very consistent expanding. We still see so many different builds and different unit types. Many current players will say, well, there's still different builds, there's different units, we're seeing all these different choices, so what are you talking about? These aren't all the same builds. And I would say, if you look at expansion timings, divorced from what unit comp they're building or what tech they're going for, the game is very uniform. So you can see Mutas one game, Lurkers the next, Roach Hydra the next, Lingbane the next, and go, these are all different builds. And you are correct, there is still a lot of variety in StarCraft 2. It's not like the game is exactly the same thing. But when it comes to expansion timings, there is very little variance. And if it had like one of those spot graphs, all the spots would be clustered in a very similar area. I hope that makes sense. Okay, Pig, so if you make these changes, you think everyone would just magically do one-base builds and all play different and every pro match will change tomorrow? Thank you, Strawman that I definitely didn't write down that question myself. Thank you. It's a good question. No. So pros and players, I think even if you make my suggested changes, will continue to do what they've been doing for a decade. If, however, the rewards nudge players in a certain direction, I do think that over time, not tomorrow, but over time, many months, the meta will shift. It will take many months. When they made the Infestor able to burrow Fungal, that's right, it could cast Fungal from Underground in 2017, I immediately called it as super overpowered, the most blatantly unfair and broken thing I'd ever seen, and I was like, I'm mostly still a Zerg in 2017. Yes, I was playing all races, but I was like, come on, man. Infestor's my favorite unit in the game, and there's no way this is fair. I was like, this is so ridiculous. And everyone shat on me. They said, no pro is using this in tournaments. You are wrong, Pig. I said, wait and see. StarCraft is hard. It takes time to figure things out. People said, you're an idiot. People kept going back. A month later, then, there's always like people when you make a strong comment in a community and they keep coming back to you every week. And they're like, haven't seen anyone use it yet. Cheryl isn't using it. Dark's not using it. Rogue's not using it. You're an idiot. And then, of course, 6 to 7 months later, Dark was basically dead in a match versus Maru. I believe it was on Whirlwind. He was like, I better experiment with burrowed infestors because I'm basically dead. I might as well F around. And he effing destroyed Maru from down 80 supply. I kid you not, there was just like every time Maru was moving around the map with a ball of biomedevac, there was an infestor that was just right-clicked on the army, just following the Marines and Marauders. And then when the Link Vein would come up, he'd just throw a fungal. The radius was like, I think my radius might have even been even bigger than it was now. It would just hit like so much of the army, this giant chunk of bio, and the Link Vein would just roll through it. It was so ridiculous. And like, so suddenly Maru was trying to scan everywhere, and it was a really big map pool at the time. So there was so many areas where the infestors could be. And it was like friggin' ridiculous. And it was so funny. And he kept doing it every ZVT, because if you beat Maru with this, you're going to beat everyone. And then every other Zerg was like, wow, maybe we should do that. It got nerfed a few months later, because it was clearly broken. And wow, can you guys believe no one realized that this broken change happened? That's crazy that no one realized how good this was. And I, of course, was there like, me, I told you all, I told you, but they're like, shut up, Pig, go back to your corner. It was one of those things where that really taught me more than ever. Something could be the most obviously broken thing or reward a certain playstyle in such a massive way. And it could still take 6 months or more of top pro gamers whose income relies on it to see one guy get in a really bad position and go, let's try that thing. And then it works in a high profile match, and just like that, it's the zeitgeist. Everyone learns to do it. Every Terran's complaining, and within a month or two, everyone's like, this needs to get removed right now. So I don't think any changes like this will change everything overnight. I think they would kind of funnel things in a different direction, if that makes sense, guys. So, and likewise, you can see that in my show match, or my show matches, these worker start mods. A lot of them, the players just do the same. They've never played the mod before. I hadn't changed the minerals and stuff in a lot of the early show matches. They just play the exact same way they normally do. They're just like, yes, so much chaos for this Dark Hero match, but it was the exact same type of chaos they do on the 12 worker start mod. They didn't adapt at all. The only difference was they both got supply blocked a ton because the timings were different. And that's one of the things I've learned through all these tests is making changes does not result in people playing differently. They need to play a lot on those changes, especially pro players, before those adaptations come into play, because StarCraft's such a fast-paced game. There's so much muscle memory, so much automation. When you start getting rewarded for a different thing, it takes time for everyone and the meta to move in a different direction. Okay, getting on to the last points before we get into the next game, guys. Pacing. I think StarCraft 2 kicks off way too fast, and it's hard to have a drawn-out skirmish phase in the current version. So that's part of why I like the idea of these changes. It's a bit personal. It's a bit subjective for me, so it's up to you. Some people will totally disagree with me on this, and that's totally fair. Let your voice be heard. It does happen where you get these kind of drawn-out skirmishes in StarCraft, but it's rare. I used to love Wings of Liberty, Heart of the Swarm going for a 9 pool, because I could F up both of our builds. We'd have slow Zerglings and Zealots for 5 minutes, and constant slow pace, small scale micro, whilst macroing up off of that slower start, and it just had cool pacing. A 12 pool these days, it hits decently, but I remember Probe, the Protoss Australian player, #1 for many years, he said, 12 pool's just it's a solid Zerg macro opening. Because, like, you 12 pool, you have 14 workers on minerals, like I was saying before. you're still mining off a full base. Your hatchery comes up earlier than it would off a 17 pool build, or about the same time. I think it's about the same time, maybe 5-10 seconds later than off a 17 pool into hatchery. It's like so similar to a normal economy build. You're like, there's not that much differentiation. It's both more and less committed in that where your opponent is already so far forward with their economy by the time it hits, it doesn't force as big of a reaction. It's so different to the old early pool variations. And in general, the game just rewards, due to 12 workers, it rewards a lot more 3-base management, super fast getting up the economy while multitasking small uncommitted harassment units and just macroing like crazy. And as long as you don't get surprised by some sort of big all-in, it's that's what it really rewards you for, because that economy explodes so fast into your natural, into your third. And if you don't take those, you get hit by that double whammy and your economy it really does suffer. So I really feel like a lot of average Joes that I watch in the last 8-10 years, Legacy of the Void especially, but especially the last 5-6 years, they just stare at their base. They feel intimidated, and they feel they get more rewarded for watching their base than trying to handle multitasking. I have so many people whose games I watched at a low level, and I go, get out there, interact with the opponent. That's the fun part of StarCraft. But they micro the Reaper. They realize, even if they killed a worker, they floated 600 minerals, and they go, oh, no. They get taught, don't do that. Just sit at home with the Reaper, or don't micro the Reaper. Shift click it in, don't look at it, and just spend your money. Just spend your money, spend your money. Okay, now we're both on 5 bases. Now we can smush maxed out armies into each other. And they get taught that that's more worth it. You can partially... I used to rage about Vibe's Bronze to GM because he was actively teaching people that. And I was like, don't do that, Vibe. It's so boring. I don't care if it's good. Don't do it, you know? And I feel like people are running into those maxed armies into each other without even learning how the basic unit interactions work. And that is sad to me. Where players, like, they don't understand how basic units work, but they're like making a max blob and they don't even know what the units are doing. They're just kind of smushing it. And I'm like, So for me, this is quite a subjective point, but I feel like for average Joes, it would just be more rewarding for them to focus on their units and have a bit more of the dancing between harassment and interactions and macro at home on one side. But also just for my own personal enjoyment, I just prefer the slower build-up pace. It just feels a bit more right. I like the smaller skirmishes dragging out. If I harass you hard or you harass me hard, we're both reacting, we get locked in for a while, and the third base just gets very delayed, and then the tech choices feel a little bit more impactful because we're on a lower income, and if I force you to build turrets and you haven't even started your third command center yet, like, that's a big response. These days, when I fly mutas in, they've got 3 command centers up, stim finished, medevacs building, double upgrades, and they can still build turrets in time, and I'm like, what's the point in even going mutalisks? Like in the old days, my mutas were like, I'm forcing missile turrets, his whole build's getting disrupted, you know? And these days, I'm like, I should probably just macro Ling Bane off 80 workers, and we can smush armies in the middle of the map, which, don't get me wrong, I'm oversimplifying it, but I do miss just the impact of those tech choices hitting in a bit earlier and that sort of stuff. So no matter what, guys, one of the downsides is any changes to workers and minerals will F people's builds. It will hurt a lot of players who go, the build changed, the game changed, I want to go back to the old thing. I hopped on for StarCraft for the old thing. If you make these changes, people will bounce off and stop playing StarCraft. Any change does that in a game, but especially a change like this where they go, why have I got less workers? All the supply counts are different. My opening build that I've been doing for years, 10 years, doesn't work anymore. There is a very real downside to changing the worker start and the minerals in the main, both of those things, but especially the worker change with the initial build orders. My hope would be, and I believe this partially because of the feedback I've got from the community, there's a lot of people who watch StarCraft and don't play anymore who are very vocal. So as many people as I've had raging at me while doing those worker experiments because they thought I would encourage whoever's left in charge at Blizzard to ruin StarCraft, even by talking about it. And I was like, look, I'm just going to have a discussion and experiment and let you guys know what I enjoy. I think there's been so many people telling me they would come back and play StarCraft if these changes were in, and that they bounced off StarCraft after Legacy came out, whether it was right after or 6 months or a year, or it was around 2020 when everyone got so good at macro that the games were getting so big and felt unmanageable for them and the pace was a bit too fast. I would hope that enough players would come back and return and new players would get into it at a higher rate than those that would bounce off. But I have no way of knowing that. I might just be being a bit starry-eyed here. In my experience, 8 working games have felt amazing, so much fun, interactive, the pacing has felt more satisfying and fun for me subjectively. That's just because you suck at the builds and your games are messier, Pig. That's a good response. I should put that in italics. That's Strawman again. Thank you, Strawman. Possibly and definitely partially all the games I play on Greenert's mod are crap shows because there's so many other changes on his mod. Part of changing, base things like this is it does disrupt the meta and it will make the game more chaotic for a while. But it also means we should probably be thinking about more ambitious changes in StarCraft if we want to reach that goal in general. If you guys haven't looked at Greenert's mod, go and look at it. It has some of the craziest changes ever. ! Greenert in my Twitch chat. I'll try to remember to put a link here in this video description as well. But there is so many changes in here. Every time I look at it, I think this is overpowered, that's overpowered, oh my god, it's overpowered. But everything is so overpowered. I've played, a lot of pros have played this as well. And most of them like it, and they all go, this is so overpowered. I thought Zerg was OP because of Lava Inject. But then they go, oh, I thought Terran was overpowered because of this. And they go, I think Protoss was overpowered because of this. There's so many insane changes and upgrades and things added in Greenert's mod that the consensus you come to once you've played like a dozen or so games on this mod is it would probably take us a year plus of competing to actually go, this is truly broken, this thing, and needs to get fixed. Like, it feels like what I love about Greenert's mod and why it's so much fun is there are 50,000 changes in this mod. There are I'm just scrolling, it's 35-page document, guys. There are so many new upgrades and changes here that it would take us so long to figure it out. And I think that discovery, in of itself would be so exciting and so fun. So that's why I would love more ambitious changes in general, going down the path of something like Greenert's mod, where we throw so many changes out. Problem, of course, with that is quality control, bugs. That being said, for those who don't know, the last patch Blizzard did had some bugs in it. Everyone was so worried because Blizzard's been AFK. They did a patch themselves last. I think Microsoft is changing things. Guys, I just got sponsored to play Diablo Immortal the other day because they had a Starcraft crossover event. Apparently there's a Starcraft shooter coming out. Blizzard, I'm not going to say they are completely redeemed, but it seems like they are putting some more money towards Starcraft. And the fact is, on the last Blizzard patch, there were bugs. They fixed them within 1 week. There was a follow-up mini patch, and they fixed the main bugs within 1 week. I don't know if there's any more big active bugs. If they can continue committing to that, because in the past, it would be like 9 months later, they'd fix the basic bugs that could easily be fixed from the previous one, because they just wouldn't get around to it. And we were like, well, I guess we just have bugs. If they can do that, I think, hopefully, they're okay with some more ambitious changes to drastically break up the game, add more fun things for every faction, and try to reintroduce the StarCraft 1 philosophy of if everything is broken, then nothing is broken. Because you always have something that's overpowered, that's broken, that you can use to fight their broken thing, and that would be really fun. We also were chatting a bit about, guys, how there could be double harvesting mod and things to make the economy more interesting. Apparently there's some technical reasons why that's really hard to do. I've heard that it might require triggers in the StarCraft editor, and therefore is probably unlikely to happen, which means we are stuck with the very simple mining method of StarCraft 2, where the workers just pair up, 2 workers a patch, and just mine efficiently. Whereas in StarCraft 1, the workers could kind of overlap and mine at different levels of efficiency. So if you spread your workers across more bases, you'd actually get a lot more mining in StarCraft 1. From what I can tell, that's not technically possible in StarCraft 2, which really sucks. Unless they were to do, proper StarCraft dev work on it, which I don't know. I'm not counting on Blizzard doing that. Last point here, guys. If you kill a drone with a Reaper in a normal game, their economy goes from 20 down to 19 drones. With an 8-worker start, it goes from 14 to 13, which is a lot more impactful. Now, don't get me wrong. There will be more times where harassment ruins you on a lower worker start. Number 1, because you're not used to your builds. Number 2, because of exactly this point. However, there are more game-ending cheeses and strategies, as well as more impactful harassment that costs more to execute. And that's the important point. What I noticed playing this mod is if I wanted to open a Reaper, I wreck my economy. My command center is like a minute later or something. It's massive delay on your command center. I think it's about 20 seconds difference, maybe 25 in current Legacy of the Void, if you go gasless command center versus barracks gas. But it's actually, if you go gas before to get an early Reaper out, it's a much bigger commitment in this mod. A much bigger commitment. That's kind of the differentiation in the early openings that's so interesting based off of these worker starts. I would describe the Legacy changes as a smoothing effect on StarCraft 2. You can more reliably do the same build right now in 12 worker start. You can more reliably get to the mid game and smash big armies with your opponent. The pros are rewarded more than ever for speed and multitasking, and the games rarely end suddenly in an 8-minute surprise move. It still happens, but not as much as the sudden surprise move game-ending things we'd see from either harassment or a cheeky all-in that they hid in Heart of the Storm and Wings of Liberty. So these are all positives. However, on the downsides, depending on your point of view, they're all negatives. Because, hey, suddenly we don't have those interesting, sudden game-ending gambles players can do. The game gets to the 4 base stage so consistently that it's not really interesting watching players get to 4 bases if they get to 4 bases in 6 minutes every game, very consistently. And regular players are smashing big armies with other players before even learning what their basic unit interactions look like. And they're kind of getting overwhelmed and leaning more into the macro rather than the micro, more than they ever have in StarCraft's history. And I think StarCraft, at its core, is not Age of Empires. It is not about base building and city building. It's part of the game, but it's more about the interesting unit interactions, and the engine of StarCraft 2 is made for micro and back and forth and unit movement, and that's why it's so fun to learn that in smaller skirmish stages, which is why I, subjectively, think it'll be better for the average Platinum player, personally. This is an example of changes that are complex, they're good in some ways, they have drawbacks, but I stand now, after 10 years, on the side of let's try the other side. I miss that other side. It'll be subjective for everyone, though, so you guys let me know. At the end of the day, I want higher minerals in the main so it doesn't mine out as fast and we don't get hit by the double whammy. I think if just the main base has 1,500 minerals, that would be amazing. Also, I think we should do an 8 worker start. I think 6 would be fine, or 7. 9 or more feels a bit similar to 12 workers in my experience. It just feels like you're breaking everyone's build orders without getting as much payoff. You're not opening up enough of a skirmish stage, slowing the pace down enough. All you're doing is breaking people's builds, which I still enjoy breaking people's build orders, but if you think about the negative side of people going, oh my god, I've got to learn a new build order, I think you kind of almost want more value. If you're going to break everyone's build orders, you want more value off that payoff, which is, I think 8 is probably the sweet spot. It's not crazy slow in the early game, but it also gives you a lot of benefits. Ideally, at the end of the day, my real hopes for this, in terms of what would I predict or hope that this would nudge StarCraft 2 play and meta in the direction of, would be more variety of expansion timings. So I'm not saying every build has to be wild, the whole meta has to shift in a different way, but if we were to look at a spot graph of when the expansions are timed, I just want to see more of a spread on that. That to me is in of itself a bit of a success. I also want more options for wild commitments in different directions, so I want there to be more greedier and also more all-in choices available. I would love worker scouting to become standard again. I think it's really healthy for getting average shows interacting with each other at the start of the game, and also just allows players to do much more wild commitments based on their own creativity. Speaking of which, I'd love there to be just generally more reward for creative and prepared special tactics players, rather than such dominance of mechanical players like we see with the frenetic pace in the current version of StarCraft 2, especially at the pro level, but I think that's reflected throughout all skill levels. This is one which I think would be a very slight slow burn sort of change. I don't think this one would happen overnight, but I definitely feel like it could just nudge things in that direction, and I really would hope that it would do so. Now, last but not least, guys, I want to mention Green Earth's mod. I'm actually going to put out a cast tomorrow of me playing in the grand finals of this mod, because a lot of this I've talked about is not just influenced off of commentating show matches and things, but it's also playing on different mods and playing tournaments. And I played a really fun grand finals on this mod the other week. I normally play it as Protoss and Zerg mostly on this mod, but this is a crazy mod. Not only do you start with 8 workers and it has kind of Heart of the Swarm style minerals, but it also just has dozens and dozens and dozens of changes. It's a 31-page document. I think it was 35 pages last time I looked at it. It looks like Green Earth's gone and updated it and maybe formatted it a bit tighter. But it's a massive, massive document. There's so many changes in here. And what's really, really cool about this, and you'll see more of that in the upload tomorrow with the commentary of that finals, and you can kind of see how an 8-worker start could play out, but you're also going to see how not only is my wish list like, okay, let's have those 2 changes, which I said those are my wish list. I have that's like my realistic wish list in terms of like, it's possible that could happen. Less likely would be I would actually love for the ladder tomorrow to change to this mod. And I think you guys might understand after I play the mod, but essentially this mod has so much overpowered stuff in it. It changes so many units. It adds so many upgrades and wild, wild things you can do that everyone who plays it is constantly start going, oh my god, this mod is so broken. This is so unfair. Zerg has that overpowered thing. But then they go, oh, Terran has that overpowered thing? That's even better. Wait, Protoss has that thing? That's even better again. And it goes around and around. And a lot of the pros as well who've played this mod have said, oh my god, that's so fun, number one. But also number two, I'm sure there's things that are completely broken, but at the moment it feels balanced in a StarCraft 1 style where everything is broken and therefore nothing is. Because it is so hard to wrap your head around all of the new interactions and how game breaking just all the upgrades and changes are, that it makes it such a intense playground where it feels like you could play on this for a year and still barely have scratched the surface in terms of how all the upgrades, builds, and new unit interactions actually work with each other. So if you guys are interested in that, just a really cool mod, which I would love any future balance changes to take inspiration from and really be more ambitious, because I really do think there's this canceling out effect when you have enough crazy things happening at once, where it's not just, oh, we've got to figure out how these 3 things interact, and then the meta settles after a month and we kind of go back into this new builds, but they're really just very slight variations of the old builds, taking into account the 2 or 3 changes we get each season. I think this mod is just such an inspiration for me right now, and I'd love to see a ton of these changes. Splash damage banshees with shockwave missiles. You can upgrade microbial shroud, gives Zerg units like a temporary movement boost. Like there's just cool stuff in this. I absolutely adore it. I think it's badass. Stay tuned for that video tomorrow. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. As always, like I said, I don't think it's likely these changes will happen. If they do, that would be cool, but hopefully you guys learnt a bit more. So many people have been asking me about worker changes and talking about them. Hopefully this answered some of your questions. Let me know what questions I forgot to answer, and we might do a follow-up or maybe add that to an analysis at the end of tomorrow's cast. Catch you guys next time. Goodbye and good night.